Welcome to the Great Girlfriends podcast where we discuss life, love, laughter, and everything in between. I am your host, Brandis Daniel.
I'm your co-host, Sybil Amuti, and we want to welcome guest great girlfriend Nicole Jardim. Nicole, how are you?
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so
Hi.
excited to be on the show with you all.
We're
Great
so
girlfriend,
excited to have you.
What you missed was a total outtake. I don't know, I was trying to make it more exotic than it was, Nicole, your last name, and I froze, and Nicole was so patient. We had to do the intro again, so thank you, Nicole.
You're hilarious. You know, it's Portuguese, so it's kind of exotic, and it's Portuguese for garden. You know, it's very similar to garden, which is French. Yeah, garden. So, yeah, I know.
Love it. Well, Nicole is a special guest with us today, a certified women's health coach and the creator of Fix Your Period, which is a series of programs that empower women to reclaim their hormone health using a method that combines simplicity and fast. I love that. I think that's the perfect cocktail for controlling and fixing your period. You need a little bit of both, right?
I completely agree. Yeah, totally.
So, great girlfriends, we brought Nicole on because, obviously having a happy period is something that almost feels taboo for most of us, as many of us struggle through the monthly menstrual cycle. And a couple of years ago, I was introduced to Nicole's work because I was having just an incredibly fussy period. And I actually told Brandis, I said, I think I'm premenopausal because everything just started to shift once a month to a point that I felt out of control. And a friend of mine actually recommended that I checked out Nicole's work, and I did. And I located some of the things that were really compromising my optimal cycle health, I'll say. And part of it was food for me and different habits that I had really picked up. So, Nicole, tell us a little bit about your work and, what are the things that you think have really brought you on this journey for us?
First of all, yes, thank you for talking about the fact that you were trying to find something else that was, not sort of like the traditional, I have to take a medication or something like that for this issue, because I think we automatically jump to that, and there are many things that we can do in advance of actually, whether it's taking a medication or a surgery or something like that. So there's a lot that I think we have a lot more power than we may have been led to believe. When it comes to our hormonal health and our periods and whatnot. And for me, this all started when I was a teenager. I had the worst teenage periods. I mean, I was quintessential. And I had really heavy, painful periods, blackout, kind of vomit-inducing type of periods. And,
wow.
And if I did power through and go to school or leave the house or whatever, it was a situation where I might leak through my clothes, or, I had to sleep with a towel on my mattress so that I wouldn't leak through when I was sleeping. So things like that, which are relatively common with teenage periods because our endocrine system is trying to work things out. It's the beginning of your reproductive life cycle. And it's one of those things where it takes some time. And I went on the pill at age 19 for 5 years to combat all of these issues, because my period not only was heavy and really painful, it became super irregular, and it was coming every 2 or 3 months. So in the end, what happened was I had gone on the pill without really addressing the underlying cause and hoping that was my period, quote unquote, panacea, but it wasn't. And so in the end, I ended up with all of these other health issues. My hair was falling out. I had chronic UTIs and yeast infections. I had really terrible gut health issues. I had melasma all over my face, and I was only 21 at that point. So I had all these problems, and no one connected them to the pill. So in the end, I went and saw an acupuncturist, and he was the one who suggested that maybe the pill was causing a lot of these problems for me. And that's how I discovered this whole world of naturally addressing your period issues.
Wow. I think that's the most powerful part about our journey is when we do go through, trying to locate solutions. And, I don't think we know our bodies the way we actually do, right? So we think that doctors know our body better than us, and that, a prescription for medicine really will speak to our issue or, make our bodies feel better. But the truth of it is our bodies tell us what's going on, and it's up to us to really fight for our optimal story. And so, for you, even after you got one diagnosis, to say, okay, let me go to an acupuncturist and actually hear something alternative. What was it that made you decide that this was now something you would share with the world?
Yeah, it was one of those things that at first I was super skeptical. And then when he described to me what he thought was happening with my body, the pieces just started to fall into place. And really what it was experiencing it, right? Because we're all pretty skeptical. And until we experience results or start to feel better, we're unsure of something that we maybe have just heard about. So when I think about my experience and that of so many of my clients, when I went to this acupuncturist and started changing my diet according to what he was suggesting and doing acupuncture once a week and addressing my stress, which was completely out of control because I was in college and I was of course eating terribly because that's college. That's what we do. And so there were multiple factors that I had to address, and that's really what it comes back to, right? Is this really approaching your body from a holistic perspective that is just not something that's inherently understood in our culture, because the one size fits all approach, whether that be a pill or a surgery or some other type of medication, is really what we subscribe to. And I get it, it's convenient and it's quote unquote easy, but in the long run, the potential side effects of that were not something that I was willing to live with. And so that light bulb moment for me was when I came off the pill under this acupuncturist care, and I had a period that was nowhere near what I had had before, and I had been terrified of what that was going to look like. And I thought, oh my gosh, this works. So that was really my turning point. And at the time, I'd just gotten out of school and I was embarking on a career in film production, but I felt really torn because that was my dream. But then this thing was fascinating. So eventually, after many years of doing film production and realizing how, realizing how incredibly powerful this approach to my health had been, this is what I decided I needed to do. So that was when I changed careers in my late 20s, early 30s, and got into this work. And like I said, it has just been completely life altering for me and for so many of my clients over the years that I just know I'm on the right path doing this work.
Wow. Nicole, who are most of your clients? Are they, moms with teens who are going through this? Is there a particular age range? Like, at what point do women get fed up and say, let me see if there's another way?
Oh man, I know, right? It's so funny. I tend to get a lot of my program signups between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. because, period pain does not discriminate. It will show up at any time of day. And usually it's woken this particular person up in the middle of the night, and they're Googling furiously to find a solution to their issues. And that's the first kind of amusing fact about how we find, or people come to find me. But it's mostly women who have been struggling for a while and they have some kind of event, like health event. So they maybe have a diagnosis of some kind, whether that's polycystic ovary syndrome or endometriosis or something else, or they just have a night where their cramps have woken them up, or their flow has just ruined the bed and they're just so pissed. And so they're ready to find a solution. And they've also more than likely have gone the traditional medical route. And again, I'm not bashing that. I'm just saying that really doesn't help us address the root cause of the problems. Like, it's going to address an acute situation, but it's certainly not going to help us figure out, what is happening from a root cause perspective. And what I mean when I say that is, what's underlying your period pain, because your period is just not randomly rebelling against you. And so these women have usually gone that route and have not found relief, or at least long-lasting relief, and they're, searching for a better solution.
Got it. And that sounds like where I was that night, where I wrote down my symptoms and I was just like, okay, I don't
It's
like
time to
right.
do something about this. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't like this, and I don't want to stay here. And one of the things that I learned when I went on your website was to ask my doctor to check my hormone levels. I didn't even know that that was something I should be asking about. So I wanted to, if you don't mind, kind of bring to our attention some of the things that we should be asking or considering or thinking as we, prepare our women's health, our plan for our 2020 bodies and having optimal health, and even sort of tackling things that have plagued us. Because for some of us, the urban legend was just that when Aunt Flo comes, it is just the saddest, most dormant time of the month. Like, you just go hide out and you lay low for 5 to 7 days, and then you resurge after everything clears. And you I've seen, and also, I was irregular and have been for a while, and didn't know that that wasn't normal. I was like, oh, I'm just irregular. It's the things that we've told ourselves and we've normalized. So kind of tell us what we should be asking or considering, as we approach our health and the way that we look at our body's picture.
Oh yes, I really love this because I think, like we were saying earlier, right, is that we don't really have a roadmap at all. There's no blueprint when it comes to our bodies or our menstrual cycles, and for the most part, I would say the majority of us are just kind of feeling around in the dark to figure it out, right? Because
Yes.
a lot of the time, our parents don't really know, and sex education is kind of lacking. I'm sure you've noticed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of this periods 101, hormones 101 type education, so that we're all in the know. Even if you know just a little bit, you're able to advocate for yourself more than you were before. And so when I think of, like, what you were just saying about asking for hormone testing from your doctor, I think that hormones get a bit of a bad rap. I feel like, when we think of hormones, we think of these things that are, just like terrible, right? She's so hormonal, or hot flashes and night sweats and puberty and pregnancy and raging periods and PMS. We don't really think of them, right, as being good things. Yeah, and so I think that we need to, first of all, do a bit of a rebrand when it comes to hormones, and sort of view them in a different light. We don't really, like I said, we're just not really viewing them in a positive way as the essential chemical messengers that they are. And until I started studying hormones and women's health, I'd never really heard of them being referred to in a way that's actually helpful to women, right? They're just the bane of every woman's existence. It's like, my hormones, they're a disaster, or whatever. So really, I think we need to shift that conversation first and foremost. And so that's the first thing. And just remembering that hormones don't exist in a vacuum. They're not something that are just going awry for no reason. They're actually a part of a much bigger system in our bodies. And if we look at it from that vantage point, then we can see why they would be going a little haywire. And so if you think about the endocrine system, so this is a system in the body that's made up of a group of glands that produce hormones. And these are chemical messengers, right? So they're moving throughout the body, communicating with other endocrine glands and organs outside the endocrine system. And so this is basically the crux of the problem, but also the solution. So that's a good thing. And so the idea, I was just going to say, the idea here is that we have two endocrine glands in our brain, and the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and they're like the conductor of the whole orchestra. And they're basically sending instruction hormones to all the other endocrine glands throughout the body. And those endocrine glands are like the orchestra. They receive these instructions, and then they produce their own hormones. And so that's kind of how it goes. The problem is that our brains tend to be hijacked by a lot of life stress. And of course, your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland, they're talking to all the other glands as well, like your adrenals, your thyroid, in addition to your ovaries, which will define how your menstrual cycle works. And so we end up in a situation where our brain has been hijacked by modern life, and our ovaries respond to that accordingly. And so we end up in a situation where we have, these various hormonal imbalances, but it's not just like, oh, your estrogen is off or your progesterone is off. It's likely that your adrenal hormones, those stress hormones, are causing the problem, and or your insulin, which is basically the blood sugar hormone. And, of course, our diets are not the most amazing these days. I know, because I've been there. So it's like a combination of this external stress and then the internal food, blood sugar dysregulation situation happening, and that throws off these like big hormones: cortisol, the stress hormone; insulin, the blood sugar hormone. And those hormones basically have like a top, like they're like the top tier hormones. So they have this downstream effect on your sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone, which we need to have a proper functioning menstrual cycle. And in the end, it's not so much the estrogen and progesterone that are the problem, it's the top tier hormones that are the problem. And so that's really the root cause of what we have to address, which is no easy feat by any means, but it's important for us to understand like where the hormonal imbalance originates so that we can sort of tackle it from that perspective.
I get it. So I hear food.
Good.
I hear food. Food is a trigger, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong. But I know when I cut my sugar down drastically, my periods are much smoother. The cramps are much less severe. I'm happier. I'm not as irritable. So I can, yeah. So I mean, I know that doctors won't say, but have you seen the relationship or correlation between sugar and the cycle, the menstrual cycle?
Oh my goodness. Yes, definitely. Man, insulin is no joke. It's like one of these, I call it like a boss lady hormone because it is one of those like cortisol where, it really means business. And, when you think about what it does, it's basically the hormone that pulls sugar from your blood into your cells, right? So it's moving sugar out of the blood into your cells. And so if you eat too much sugar, so this is just sort of a basic breakdown of what will happen. If you eat too much sugar or too many refined carbohydrates, because it's not just sugar alone, it's like anything that your body is overly sensitive to that will raise your blood sugar up. So even if you have a food sensitivity, that's what will happen. That's a response that your body will have. And so your pancreas will release a whole bunch of insulin to move that sugar out of your blood because it's dangerous to have too much sugar in your blood. That's what your body says. And so then it will move it into your cells that are stored in your liver. And what ends up happening is you have this subsequent crash. So your blood sugar has gone up really high because you ate that food that is not in agreement with your metabolism. And then it crashes, and then you don't feel very good. And, I think our ancestors probably had that happen maybe once every couple of months. Like maybe they stumbled upon like a blueberry bush that was full of blueberries and they gorged. We're not doing that now. We're doing that every single day of our lives, if you think about it, right? Especially if you, eat a bagel for breakfast, for instance, or you eat something that's too high carb and not high enough protein or high enough fat for breakfast, and you have this blood sugar spike, and by 10 a.m. you're desperately scraping for the coffee and needing a pick-me-up because your blood sugar crashed so hard. And so that we continue in this cycle throughout the day, all day, every day. And that's a huge problem because over time, insulin actually has, it has an effect on our ovaries. We actually have insulin receptors on our ovaries. So for instance, here's one example of what will happen. Like someone who maybe has a predisposition to polycystic ovary syndrome, which is an inflammatory condition that's driven by, testosterone dominance is one of them, but it also is linked to estrogen and progesterone dysregulation as well. What will happen is your ovaries basically, they kind of have a switch that gets flipped, essentially, to make this easy for everyone. And when there's too much insulin in the blood. And what will happen is they start to produce more and more testosterone instead of the estrogen and progesterone that they're supposed to be producing on, to drive the menstrual cycle. And so what tends to happen in a lot of instances is women stop ovulating, or their ovulation becomes delayed, or, they skip a period, or, they skip many periods. And, if you have too high androgens like testosterone in your body, what happens is you might lose hair on your head. So it's like typical, male pattern baldness. You might grow hair on your face or on your chest. You may put on weight. There's multiple issues that show up. And so those are all PCOS-like symptoms. Not everyone develops PCOS, but you can develop the symptoms of it if you have, too high insulin and ultimately too high androgens or male hormones. So this is just from your food alone. I mean,
Wow.
there's multiple ways that this can show up. So it's so important for us to be really to have a deep understanding of how that cookie is affecting our ovaries.
Woo, not the cookie.
So, okay.
I know. Sorry, girl.
So,
I know. It's so hard.
I know. And look, Sybil, I was over here talking away, realized I'm totally on mute. So, Nicole, this is so good. So, listen, is this something, because let me just say, I almost feel like, okay, I need to go to some specialized doctor if I want to have some type of analysis done on my hormones. But is this something that we can talk to our regular gynecologist about, or a regular general practitioner about? Like, who do we go to have these conversations about our hormones and what we can eat best for them and kind of understand our bodies better?
Yes, I really love this question. And I think it's a little convoluted right now because what I continue to hear from women is that first of all, they don't know this information and their doctors weren't a whole lot of help. And then someone will say, I'm so lucky I have a great gynecologist and she's willing to talk to me about all of this. But I really wish that wasn't that was the norm, really, that we would all be able to have this kind of conversation. I think that there's a bit of a disconnect because traditional medical doctors don't really get a whole lot of training on nutrition and stress and their impact on our physical, mental, and emotional health. Whereas, someone like me as a women's health coach, like this is all I've been trained in. Like I didn't go to medical school, but I know nutrition and I know stress and I know how to help women understand this connection. And so there are some doctors who definitely will talk about this, but I do think that generally speaking, that conversation is not going to happen so much. So a lot of women just turn to Google, which can be really scary because there's a whole lot of misinformation out there, right? As you guys know. And so it's one of those things where, online, there are some websites and, for me, my website, for instance, I have a blog, I talk about all of this information. So there are places to go that are reputable where you can find out information about how food affects your menstrual cycle and how stress will impact your period or your fertility. But ultimately, I feel like that conversation is lacking in traditional healthcare, unfortunately. So I do recommend looking for someone who's a health coach or a nutritional therapist or a nutritionist or a nutrition consultant or a dietitian who is more focused on the holistic dietary principles that I subscribe to, because dietitians are traditionally trained according to the American Dietetics Association. Basically, they follow the government mandated guidelines around nutrition, which to me are a little outdated. I might get in trouble for saying that, but it is what it is. So, I recommend that if someone is looking for this kind of help, that they might have to seek that out. And if, and I understand that, this is something that's out of pocket, it's not necessarily covered by insurance, although health coaches now are, there's a national certification for health coaches. So you will start to see more health coach help in traditional medicine, which is really exciting.
Okay, but Nicole, I do want to know though, I mean, if you do go to your OBGYN and ask for your hormone levels to be checked, at that point, I guess at that point you do still need to run the numbers or the information by another specialist who can really interpret it. Is that what I'm hearing too?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, your doctor should be able to interpret it. So here's what I also see. I think that you should be able to go to your doctor and explain your symptoms and then get like a hormone panel run. And what I would suggest is, here are a few guidelines for testing. I think the first thing is, if you have any kind of period problem, whether your period is completely missing or you have chronically heavy, painful periods, you certainly want to go through the right testing process and the right channels. And so, for instance, because, ultimately, like a lot of the time, a diagnosis comes from ruling other things out, right? So in order to be diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome, you really have to rule out what they call hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is a condition where you lose your period based on, stress, chronic stress, or, under eating or over exercising. So they're, it's basically stress on your hypothalamus and it's causing dysfunction. So it can't communicate with your ovaries. Whereas polycystic ovary syndrome, right, like I was just describing, it's sort of like a testosterone or androgen dominance type scenario. And so it just depends, right? So you need to do the right amount of testing. But I would say as a first step, you'd want to test your estrogen or your estradiol, which is the most dominant estrogen during your cycling years if you're not pregnant. And you'd want to test your progesterone. And so progesterone really should only be tested about 5 to 7 days after you've ovulated. And a lot of us don't know when we've ovulated. So I think it's really important for us to have an understanding of when that might be happening. And usually I have my clients look at their cervical fluid because that changes. It becomes wetter as you ovulate, as you're approaching ovulation, and then drier, stickier after you've ovulated. So that's a key sign. And then taking your basal body temperature in the morning, first thing upon awakening. I have all this on my blog, by the way, for anyone who's like, what are you talking about, Nicole? But that's an incredible tool as well, because you're basically finding out whether you're ovulating or not. You can also use ovulation test kits. Those will give you an idea of when ovulation is happening, but they don't confirm it. So any way that you can find to figure out if and when you've ovulated, then you want to test progesterone 5 to 7 days after that. And the reason for that is because ovulation is what causes you to make progesterone, your ovaries to make progesterone, and before ovulation, you're not really making very much progesterone. So it's hard to gauge accurate levels of that hormone if you have not ovulated. So estrogen, progesterone, I think testosterone is a good one as well, because low libido and as well as testosterone dominant problems are also an issue. So I think testosterone is good too. And then I think a thyroid panel, taking a full thyroid panel as well, is really useful. And that would require TSH, free T4, free T3, and reverse T3. I would recommend that everyone do a full thyroid panel, because your thyroid is intricately connected to how your ovaries are working. And again, like that whole endocrine system, if we come back to that. So I'd say that's a good place to start and see what's going on as a baseline. Hopefully that helps.
Right?
You know what two things I realized as you were talking, I was like, we really don't know our bodies. Like we don't know our bodies enough to even really fully support them. And so this type of education is so essential. The other inside thought that I had when you mentioned low libido was, I don't really know what libido should look like. And when you said that, I was like, how do we know as women if we're at low or high libido? Like, I don't think we know what that level should look like. And I know Brandes has one more question about fibroids that she wanted to ask. So I didn't want to take that, but I just want to tell you what I was thinking. Yeah.
I mean, I could say something really quick about libido, if you don't mind. Yeah, I was just going to say real quick. Okay, good. Because when libido is sort of like a spectrum, right? I mean, it really is, because not all of us have like this raging sex drive, all day, every day by any means. And some of us do. So I think it's your normal. And I want to remind all the listeners of that too, right? Because you can do all the tests in the world and they can show as normal, or they can come back as low or high on that spectrum or the scale or the range. And, at the end of the day, it's about your symptoms and how you're feeling. And so if you have not had sex in months with your partner and you're not feeling that at all, then, and that was not the case maybe 6 months or a year ago or even 2 years ago, then that's something to think about, right? So I think it's really coming back to what we feel. And so I think for some people, they're not that interested in having sex, more than like once a month or whatever. Some are just excited to do it around ovulation time when your sex drive is usually at its highest. So I think it really comes back to you checking in with yourself to see what's shifted, if anything.
God, well, definitely from the 20s to 30s, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Full transparency. And then definitely after having children, I had to like reinforce certain things in my just time and energy. And I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I need to test.
No, it's so good that you said that, actually, because after having kids, your hormones basically crash. and your
Yeah.
sex hormones basically do a whole, quote unquote reset. And so they're not, they're not what they were during pregnancy, of course, and they're not really what they were prior to pregnancy, because you're not ovulating, so you're really not making these sex hormones on a regular basis, and so you end up in a situation where you're kind of flatlined a little bit, and that goes on for a while. And the point is to take care of your small human and to not be too focused on having sex. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so yes, and it takes time to rebuild as you start ovulating again and you have these ovulatory cycles again, and it slowly starts to build up. But then you're coupling that with the extreme stress that comes with taking care of small kids in a society that doesn't really support us in doing that. So it's complicated. It really is.
Yeah. Preach. Yes.
Yeah. I know, right?
Look, Nicole, we just need like a four-part podcast with you, because there's so much.
I know.
Really
I'll come back.
Really quickly, before we get off, there's a lot of our great girlfriends who are dealing with fibroids. I know so many of them who are having surgery to remove fibroids. A lot of them are concerned, like, is this going to interrupt, me when I get ready to have kids? I have so many girlfriends that are struggling with this, and I know in particular Black women deal with this, even more than I think any other race of women. Is there anything that you have found that that worked in terms of like shrinking fibroids? Because I think I saw that on your website as well.
Yeah, shrinking fibroids, I will preface all of this by saying that it's challenging. I mean, there's no doubt about that. They are notoriously difficult to treat. And what I have found is that usually in my practice, I've worked with women who are working in conjunction with their doctor, and they're paying attention to their fibroids and making sure that they're either not growing or getting bigger and causing, health related issues. So what I have found is that having that foundation, right? So we start with bringing more nutrients into someone's diet, because at the end of the day, our bodies are only going to be as healthy as the food that we're eating. And so I start there. Like, I start with every woman I work with, just like, okay, the first thing I need you to start doing is to start to fill your plate with, more greens. And that's a relatively easy thing to do. And I understand that, there's food deserts, and there are places where people can't get the food that they need to get. So I take that into consideration too. But I think generally speaking, if we can start to shift away from, having too many carbohydrates on our plate and more of the leafy green, dark leafy green vegetables, cruciferous vegetables. When I say cruciferous, I'm talking broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. These all contain an ingredient known as diindolylmethane, or DIM, and that particular compound is notorious for estrogen detoxification. And so when we think about fibroids, which are fed by estrogen, and other conditions too, like endometriosis and adenomyosis, these are, estrogen, they're sort of conditions of estrogen dominance. And so when we're thinking about how to help remove estrogen from our bodies, we've got to focus on, first of all, what we're eating, and then secondly, how our liver is actually breaking down those estrogens, because your liver breaks down hormones so that they can be removed through your colon when you go to the bathroom. And so with the liver, those cruciferous veggies are really helpful in supporting the phase 1 and phase 2 of liver hormone detoxification. So we've got to bring more of the leafy greens and the cruciferous vegetables into our diet. So I ask women to get 1 to 2 servings of that a day. And then the second thing I was talking about before was the blood sugar balancing, because unfortunately, high insulin actually increases your estrogen levels. So this dysregulated blood sugar causes an estrogen problem. So if we can focus on bringing more protein and fat into our diet to replace the refined carbohydrates. And when I say refined carbohydrates, I'm talking about anything from bread all the way to any kind of baked good, really. If we can bring more sweet potatoes or plantain or pumpkin into our diet instead of those, to replace them with a healthy source of protein and fat like avocado, and then more of the veggies, if you arrange your plate in that way as often as you possibly can, it's going to really shift what is happening with estrogen in your body. And estrogen, like I said, if you don't have your estrogen in, high levels, or it's not, being recirculated in your body because your liver doesn't have the raw material to break it down, then you're not going to feed your fibroids with that estrogen or that excess estrogen. And that's, a very basic way of breaking down a pretty complicated topic. But the idea here is to really start with what's on your plate. And then, of course, there are a lot of other practices that I have helped women with, and, women who come to me ask me about things like castor oil packs, putting castor oil in your abdomen. Castor oil has many healing benefits, and you can search for those online. I have a blog post about that. Vaginal steaming as well is another one that I've heard amazing reviews from women who have fibroids or have any kind of estrogen dominant type conditions, like whether that's heavy bleeding, even postpartum. So they've found great relief with that too. So I feel like there are multiple modalities that one can incorporate in addition to, just working with your doctor and making sure that, your fibroids are not growing or they're not getting to dangerous sizes.
Oh my goodness. So good. I feel like great girlfriends, you're going to be rewinding and replaying and just kind of jotting down so many notes and questions for your doctors. But this is the type of conversation that we need to have in our circles around women's health and things we should know.
Yeah.
And even the idea that she mentioned of feeding your fibroids, like that consciousness when you are having brunch with great girlfriends, like being suggestive in the kind of foods we eat and just the attention that we pay to it. So, Nicole, thank you so much, because I feel like I'm prepared for my next appointment with like I'm armed and equipped with the most, high level intelligence I can take into the room. And I think it's going to, help other women really feel confident in the way that we do ask the questions, so that, doctors sometimes push back and we feel confident that we know we want to ask these questions. Even if we don't have the answers, we still want to ask them and receive knowledge that can take us higher and get us, closer to optimal health. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much. This is so helpful. This was awesome.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for saying that.
Oh my gosh, we have to have you back on, because I think there's more and more that we haven't even really scratched the surface of what you bring to life on your website. How can they get more information, learn more about you, follow the movement, take the quiz, and just be charged up for 2020?
Thank you. So you can all find me at NicoleJardim.com, and I have a blog with a whole bunch of this information on there. In addition to that, you can take my period quiz on my website, and that will provide results that are basically geared towards whether you have a specific type of hormonal imbalance. So I'll help you kind of start to decipher what might be going on. And you can also find me on my podcast as well. It's The Period Party. And I also have a book coming out in April 2020. So that's called Fix Your Period. And that has all of the stuff I've been sharing is in that in depth, basically.
Oh, congratulations.
I love it.
Fantastic.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is awesome. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of The Great Girlfriends.
Yes, if you enjoyed this episode, please share this with 3 of your great girlfriends.
Absolutely. And make sure you jump onto iTunes right now and leave your review. Let the world know how you feel about our 5-star show.
Absolutely. And we like to end our episodes by thanking our husbands.
Thank you, Kwaku.
Thank you, Mr. Rich Daniel.
And then we thank the minis. Thank you, Sam and Dylan.
And thank you to Miss Sky.
And thank you, great girlfriends, for trusting us as your go-to source for everything life, love, and laughter. Make sure you listen each Wednesday on iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Bean, Podcast Republic, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and every other podcasting service.
Yes, and please check us out on our social. You can follow us on Instagram,
The Great Girlfriends,
on Twitter,
_Great GFS,
on Facebook,
The Great Girlfriends,
and please do join our Facebook group with over 16,000 great girlfriends.
Yay!
And that is
The Great Girlfriends.
Awesome.
Make sure you post your questions online, share with your friends,
keep listening,
and keep being a great girlfriend. I'm Sybil.
I'm Brandis.
And we're signing off. Peace.